a cup of tea, the most profound academic friendships begin. I am Divya, and it's my absolute privilege to welcome you back as we transition into what promises to be a deeply enriching highlights the day. Our focus this forenoon, now it's afternoon, is a theme that is as beautiful as it is profound. Voices across languages, women writing in translation. You know, we often speak of translation as a bridge, but perhaps it is better described as an act of profound hospitality. When we translate women's writing, we are not just moving words from our one dictionary to another. We are inviting our sister's lived experience, her resistance, and her unique selfhood into a new home. It is literally an act of solidarity that allowed these vital stories to echo far beyond their original borders, ensuring that no voice remain a captive of geography. To guide us through this intellectual journey, we are immensely honored to be joined by our chairperson, Professor Nagratna V. Parande. Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, please come. And our guest of honor, Mrs. Arshia Hassan. Please, ma'am. It is truly a joy to have you with us, ma'am. Professor Parande is a scholar of exceptional distinction whose expertise in diaspora literature and translation studies is recognized internationally, notably through her work as a research fellow at Leiden University in the Netherlands. With over 25 years of scholarly wisdom and her leadership at Rani Chennamma University, she provides us with a sure and steady compass for today's dialogue. Ma'am, I most respectfully invite you to take the chair and grace. We are equally fortunate to be joined by three distinguished panelists who bring such a rich collection of perspectives to our stage. Please join me in welcoming Dr. K. Sunita Rani. Please, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. As a Dean of Social Science at the University of Hyderabad, her tireless work in gender studies and her evocative translations of Dalit women writings, like the beautiful flowering from the soil, have truly illuminated the transformating power of the written word. Beyond her academic brilliance, her heart from the community and her work with the Bhumika Women's Collective remind us all that true scholarship is more powerful when it serves the world around us. It is also a distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Renuka L. Nayak. Welcome, ma'am. Joining us from the Central University of Karnataka, Dr. Nayak brings a nuanced and knowledgeable perspective shaped by 2 decades of research. Her unique engagement with health, humanities, and Indian literature in translation adds a vital modern dimension to how we understand women's voices as they travel and transform across cultural boundaries. Finally, we are delighted to have Dr. Asma Rashid with us today. Welcome, ma'am. Teaching at EFLU here in Hyderabad, Dr. Rashid reminds us that translation is at its heart a profoundly pedagogical act, a way of teaching us to see the world through another's eyes. Her thoughtful reflections on multilingual education and women's studies make her an invaluable voice in this afternoon's conversation. Before we start the session, I want you to felicitate madam first. all of them. Can you please? My first chairperson, Professor Parande. Now, Dr. K. Sunita Rani. And Dr. Renuka L. Nayak. And last, Dr. Asma Rashid. Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, I will hand over this session to the chairperson, Dr. Parande. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dignitaries on the days and off the days, scholars and students. At the outset, I want to thank the organizers for having me here, and I also would like to express my pleasure in being part of this symposium organized to commemorate International Women's Day. This occasion is not only a celebration of women's achievements across different fields, but also a moment for reflection. Reflection on the voices, experiences, and narratives that women bring into our cultural and intellectual life. Literature has always been a powerful space where women articulate their experiences and question social hierarchies and imagine new possibilities for freedom and equality. However, in multilingual societies like India, many of these voices remain confined within particular linguistic regions. It is, therefore, very appropriate that today's symposium reflects on women writing in India. It is in this context that the theme of women writing in translation becomes especially significant, because translation enables these voices to travel beyond linguistic boundaries and participate in wider literary and cultural conversations. Here, I must mention, as in the first session, Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir mentioned about Susi Taru and K. Lalita's anthology. These writers, these editors have shown bringing women's texts together through translation helps us rediscover a long and rich tradition of women's literary expression. Their work, Women Writing in India, demonstrates how translation can recover voices that were historically overlooked and marginalized. Translation plays a vital role in enabling literature to travel across linguistic and cultural barriers. So, as I said, in multilingual societies like India, translation functions as a bridge that connects diverse literary traditions and makes them accessible to wider audiences. Women writing in particular offers valuable insights into experiences of gender, identity, memory, resistance, and social transformation. Yet, historically, many women writers remained confined within the boundaries of their regional languages. Their works often did not reach broader readership because of linguistic barriers. In this context, translation becomes an important cultural practice that allows these voices navigate beyond their immediate linguistic communities. Women's literary traditions in India are deeply multilingual. As we know, Indian literature cannot be understood through a single language alone. It consists of multiple voices emerging from different linguistic and cultural contexts. Translation, therefore, becomes a key medium through which these diverse voices enter shared intellectual spaces. However, translating women writing also involves several challenges because language is closely connected with culture, history, and social structures. When a translator brings a text from one language to another, they must navigate, negotiate these complex cultural meanings. As Susan Basnet argues, translation is not merely about linguistic equivalence, but also negotiating cultural meanings between languages. Another important perspective comes from Gayatri Spivak, who describes translation as an intimate act of reading. According to Spivak, translators must approach the text with sensitivity to its linguistic and cultural nuances. This is particularly important when translating women writing, where emotional registers, lived experiences, and social contexts are deeply embedded in the language. Similarly, Lawrence Venuti speaks about the invisibility of translators. Translators often remain unnoticed even though they play a crucial role in bringing text into a new linguistic context. When we talk about women writing in translation, recognizing the translator's role becomes important because translation itself is an act of interpretation and cultural mediation. Translation can also function as a feminist intervention. By translating works written by women, translators help bring marginalized voices into mainstream literary discourse. These translations challenge dominant literary canons and expand our understanding of literature. They allow readers across cultures to engage with experiences that might otherwise remain invisible. There are several examples of women writers whose works have gained wider recognition through translation. For example, the writings of Mahashweta Devi have reached global audiences through translation, highlighting the issues of tribal identity, gender oppression, and social justice. Similarly, writers like Olga, Bama have gained international readership through translation. More recently, recognition of Kannada writer Banu Mushtaq at international level through Booker Prize demonstrates how translation can bring regional women's voices into global literary conversations. Her work shows how stories rooted in local realities can resonate with readers across the world once they become available in translation. In the context of regional literatures, translation therefore plays a crucial role in bringing women writers into national and international conversations. Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Bengali, and other Indian literatures have produced powerful women writers whose works deserve wider readership through translation. So from a broader perspective, translation reshapes literary history. It challenges the idea of a single dominant literary tradition and instead highlights the plurality of voices that constitute literature. Through translation, regional literatures become a part of world literature, allowing readers across cultures to engage with diverse experiences. Therefore, when we discuss women writing in translation, we are not simply discussing a technical linguistic process. Rather, we are engaging with questions of power, representation, and cultural visibility. Translation allows marginalized voices to travel across linguistic boundaries and participate in wider literary conversations. With these reflections on the importance of translating women's texts and women writing in translation, we move to panel discussion, panel presentation. We have a group of scholars and translators who will share their perspectives on different aspects of women writing in translation. Let me begin by inviting our first speaker, Professor K. Sunita Rani. Madam, please. Thank you.
Chair of this panel discussion, my co-panelists, Dr. Geeta, Department of English, colleagues from Department of English, colleagues and friends, and my dear students, a good morning to all of you, a good afternoon to all of you. Where do I begin? Because we are all translated beings as we keep reading and as we keep listening to this concept of we as translated beings. Translation creates a tradition, a literary tradition, a cultural tradition, even in the target language. Let me begin from there. When we talk about politics of translation, as a reader, as a bilingual reader, as a teacher, as a researcher, and as a translator, the first example that comes to my mind is Russian literature in Telugu translation. Because our generation, I'm sure our previous generations as well, grew up reading Russian literature and Bengali literature. Extensive translations, but no translated book would have the translator's name. Going back to the invisibility of the translator. That was the politics at that time. But now, visibility of the translator is the politics, the current politics, because translation is the translator's work as well, starting from the choice of the text that needs to be translated to the product that is published and the way it is read, even by readers. Not just the identity of the writer, but the identity of the translator is also taken into consideration by readers and critics as well. So when we were reading all these writers like Tolstoy, Turgenev, Pushkin, Maxim Gorky extensively, and it went to the extent of us as young people thinking that probably it was part of Telugu literature. Okay, we used to wonder why the names are very different, and they're not like other books because it's never mentioned that it is a translation. But it's much later when I started looking at translations from a critical perspective that I had a question that why there are no women Russian writers at all in Telugu translation. Are there no women writers or are they not translated? When I checked, when I asked some people who are considered to be authorities on Russian literature, they gave me an interesting reason. They said maybe there are women writers, probably they don't write serious writings. No, maybe they write romantic poetry, so they are not translated into other languages. Then who came to my mind? Pushkin. How about Pushkin? Pushkin wrote romantic poetry, but he was translated into all languages. Why are women not translated? Much later, I found an answer when I found the writings of Alexandra Kollontai, who was deconstructing the gendered notions in Russian literature, in Russian society, who was trying to mold a new woman in early 20th century. So it is from that location that I learned how a tradition is created even in the target language. And it is starting from, as I said, starting from the choice of the work to the process of translation, it is entirely political. Particularly, I would like to say here, it is not taking marginalized literatures into translation to empower them, but I think it is empowering the target literature to take literatures from other languages. Here, I think most of us are talking about English as the target language. I think it is enriching, empowering literatures in English when we take texts from regional languages or Indian languages. I would like to read it like that. Wherever there are gaps, experiences that are not dealt with in English by writers who are writing in English, I think that is where it gets enriched. So I'd like to take a few examples quickly from my location as a translator, my choice of the text and the kind of dilemmas that I faced while translating the text, where I could locate myself and where I could not locate myself, both ways. But it was my choice to articulate those texts in another language. That was my concern, that I wanted to share what I have read with the readers in the target language. The first text is a play by Girish Karnad, Hayavadana. This translation was never published, but as we all know, translation can be used as a methodology, as a research methodology, or as a pedagogy. So when I translated this play, Hayavadana, until then I had read it, I had taught it, but the kind of layers that started unraveling when I was translating this was fascinating. Because what the text, I'm sure most of us have read the text, I don't have to narrate the story, but only one detail about it, there are two men and one woman. One of these two men is from a privileged community, class, everything. The other is from a marginalized community and class. The woman coming from a privileged background as well. There is an interaction between the three in English, because English text was my source text. How would it read? Like if they're addressing each other, one another as you, is it a singular you or a plural you? So if the woman is addressing men in plural you and the men are addressing her in singular you, then there is a need to employ a gender lens to understand the gender dynamics. At the same time, if the man from a marginalized background is addressing the others in plural you and the others are addressing him in singular you, then there is this entire discussion about the social inequalities. The English text comfortably avoids, mentioning this. Much later, I tried to access Kannada text, but I could not. I tried reading, but I could not make much of it. So I think simultaneously, the text can be translated into three versions. One, erasing this you comfortably and conveniently and completely. Two, translating it from a feminist perspective. And the three is translating it from a perspective of, with a social consciousness, aware of the social inequalities. So all this came to me after translating the play and then rereading it, which also held me back from publishing. Of course, getting the approval from the writer was difficult, but other than that, even publishing it became a huge dilemma for me, because there are these unresolved questions for me as a translator. The second translation that is published and by a feminist writer, is a collection of short fiction by Geetanjali, whose short fiction interestingly is considered to be very depressive, very negative, because she looks deep into the lives and realities of women, the sufferings of women. So generally her writings are considered to be, why do you write only about the negative aspect of women's lives? Why do you write only about disappointment and distress in man-woman relationships? You should look at the positive side of it. These are all the comments. But I do connect myself with her, because when majority of women have so many complaints unarticulated, grievances unarticulated, how can a writer not look at it? How can a writer glorify it? But when I choose Geetanjali's fiction as an example, what I want to talk about is that it was, for me as a translator, it was empowering for me to translate her fiction into English. But at the same time, it also pushed me into, not clinical depression, but it pushed me into depression, that you feel surrounded by the sufferings of women, which are, you have heard or you have seen, but you have pushed them aside, not to articulate them or ignore them, so that you don't realize how much pain and suffering is there in women's lives. But in one this, where the disagreement, I'm talking about the disagreement between the translator and the writer, where in one of the stories, her protagonist is completely disillusioned with the uninterested husband, ignoring children. So she sits in the balcony watching the passers-by. A man who walks that way every day looks at her and passes by. Suddenly, one day, he just barges into the house.
It's a responsibility, not just to show our scholarship here, but to show the concern, share our experience. Because for a woman, experience matters. And as a woman, we have seen that women's writing has always been neglected. So far, it may be syllabus, it may be classroom, it may be the attitude of the student towards the teacher, female teacher, or the text. You just check your syllabus. How many women writers are there? Out of 8 texts, you may come across 1 or 2. Right? So it speaks a lot about power dynamics. So what is women's writing? Why women's literary tradition is recorded very late, or it began late? And why women's writing is always considered as limited in its scope? It's considered emotional, good for nothing. Right? So that apathy exists. In Kannada literary tradition, especially women's tradition, we have come across women writers from different communities, mainly from upper class. They were also denied education. They were also trained in a very different way. So initially, the fight, the struggle was to gain education, a space for themselves to get trained and to find a way to professionalism, to find some profession. So we have women writers like Janakama, Gauramma, Shantama, who show influence of Gandhian and Tagorean ideologies. They have been seeking justice. They have been speaking agency. But agency was not given as such. It has to be taken and it has to be asserted. So they did assert themselves, but keeping within the structure. So the main target at that time was patriarchy. Then you have Sumangala, Sarvamangala and others. We have to remember a point that men also wrote about women, but their representation of women, the characters that we find, we could never relate. So most of the women, they complain that the women that they find in those novels, those short stories, those poems were not them. They couldn't relate. So men could not translate women. They could not get into the inner domain. Next stage of writing that we find and the women's occupation was that of the experiences of a woman as a housemaker and experience of a woman as a professional. Earlier it was only the home and hearth, but now there is a public space. So how would she play this double role, multiple roles, right? So in women's writing, if you say that there is no intellectualism, if you say that there is no concern for nation or nationalism, you don't find any intellectual inquiry as such, then somewhere we have to remember that the very process of women's writing, the very core of women's writing was to assert that they are different. It is not the question of equality, it is the question of equity, right? So they wanted to say that yes, they are different. Yes, the way they write is different. Yes, the way they experience their life is different. And yes, the demands are very different. So let me quickly take you to 3 women who wrote at the same time. In 1970s, we have Veena Shanteshwar Madam, who is a very prominent voice in Kannada literature. She is a doctorate, she is a professor of English, retired now, educated, coming from an educated family background with a very supportive family. Right? And you have Vaidehi from coastal Karnataka, Kundapura, writing in Kundapura Kannada, again from upper class and caste. So caste, class, gender and religion matters. So I am not bringing in Eurocentric, Western feminist interventions here, because you know, applying the Western theories directly to our lived experiences is a bit problematic. That's what I found as a researcher. So you can modify it. You can't deny it, because nothing wrong in calling yourself a feminist or a womanist. You need a political agency to establish your identity. Otherwise, you'll go back to ground zero again. So these women, educated in English traditions, British literary traditions, they understood the culture, the nuances of our culture, our tradition, and they critiqued those issues or those factors that influenced man-woman relationship. So in one of the stories, Veena Shanteshwar writes how a professional woman juggles between the household chores and professional work. Her husband returns every weekend, he comes home every weekend and expects her to be ready. The woman on Saturday evening when she's returning home, she is thinking about how she can save money by not taking an auto or going by a bus, but rather walk till the bus stop. How she can buy some vegetable, because that's her husband's favorite. And when she returns, she's worried about getting up at 4 a.m., filling the buckets, worried about father-in-law, worried about his medicine, worried about the tantrums of the kids, buying the uniform. Whereas man comes home and says, other women manage so well, you are good for nothing. Even in a general way, just casual way, the words that are uttered by men hurt. And she takes it normally, he also behaves normally. The same day, she is invited to deliver a talk on International Women's Day. She rejects the proposal, saying that her husband is coming after a week. So she has to be at home. She can't, give that family time for this professional job. She says, no, I don't want to come. But that whole day, the drama that unfolds at home is, he keeps saying that you are good for nothing. You don't have time for me. You don't show any interest in me. The woman who works 24/7, how do you expect her to cater to her bodily needs? Or be energetic, be active, right? That evening, he decides to pack his bag and go back to his place. And there she decides that she has been sacrificing all the way. And if she desires a change, there is no point in argumenting or fighting with a man. The way she has been trained to surrender herself completely, forget her identity, her personality, her individuality, the man has also been trained by our own tradition to be assertive, demanding, never compromise, boost one's own ego, never understand women. So the way the woman's role has been constructed for the women Similarly, the woman's role is, or the woman and man's role is constructed for the man as well. Then let me move quickly to Sara Abubkar. Right? So one is from the mainstream Kannada literary tradition, the other one is from 1970s Bandaya Sahitya, which often people don't speak in English classes. Bandaya Sahitya is the one, the protest movement is the one which paved way for the women from marginalized communities, the minorities, oppressed castes and classes. So there we find for the first time B.T. Lalita Nayak, a woman from Lambani community, highly, like maybe hardly educated for 4th or 5th class, with the scope and encouragement given by a man again, that is P. Lankesh, she starts writing. Kunni and others, they have been writing about Muslim community. They have been representing community in a very different way. Right? But when Sara Abubkar appears, she represents the community. So she speaks for and about the Bahari community. Remember, these marginalized communities, oppressed castes, the minorities and the castes, have often been neglected in mainstream, and they have been projected as thieves, lakdi chor, bacha chor, as we say, just looking at these as outcasts, looking at them like just constructing their identity the way they want. So there was a problem, that was the society, right? So B.T. Lalita Nayak speaks about a typical Lambani patriarchy, Lambani tradition. Tribes or nomadic tribes which seems to be more liberal, we often claim it, but right, they also have certain issues which they don't acknowledge, or they are not aware of it. So no matter which community it is, we are not aware, we are not conscious of our behavior, our words, right? So she, in Nele Bele and Gati, she writes about it. And when it comes to Sara Abubkar, her writings you must read. Chandragiri Tiradalli, that's the only text which has been translated into English by Vanamala Vishwanatha. I read the Kannada text and I couldn't come out of its hangover for weeks. I lived amidst a Muslim community, different communities. I'm very lucky to be part of most of these communities that way. So I had seen them going through, but I could never understand the predicament. I always thought that all women are same, all experience trade, what I'm trying to say.
For example, the first word in apparently that Homer uses to describe Odysseus in his text is a word called polytropos. And when it arrives in English, generally it has been, the word has been presented as resourceful or of many twists and turns. This man has been described in this way because, of course, the hero in literary traditions is very noble in mainstream understanding. So when Wilson translates this word, she uses the word complicated, right? So meaning to say, hinting at or helping us to understand that perhaps there is remember there's moral ambiguity about the way Odysseus goes around doing things. So there's a lots of things that she changes the words, and instead she says that, uses the word complicated to suggest that this is a man who does things to get something done. Similarly, when there is a word for enslaved woman in the original, in Homer's text, the word used is enslaved woman for the household, and it has been described by earlier translators as maids, as maid servants, as girls, or also in some cases as guilty maids. These are the terms which have been used for these figures. And Wilson translates this as slaves, simply to show the question that the speaker before me was talking about, agency. She uses this term simply to show that these are women who have no property, no agency. They're not immoral women. They're not immoral household staff. They simply belong to someone else. So it's been pointed out that when Wilson is doing these kinds of things, she has been, well, there are different reviews if you go back and look at those reviews, but one of the things that's being said about her translation is that she's removed the patriarchal, judgmental, moral, if you want, misogynist kind of
language with her act of translation, that she uses a more gender conscious approach that looks at the different protagonists in the text from from a more contemporary perspective. I'm tempted to also look at a couple of translations of Ismat Choktai's work, and if you will, I realize that I'm the last speaker in this panel, and though it is for a lot of people in this room, it may not be lunchtime or a time for a meal yet, but for some of us it might still be time for a meal, and I'm standing there on that, which a translator does sometimes. Right, so I'm thinking of two translations of Ismat Choktai's work, one of a particular story, and that story is a very familiar one, I'm sure. It's titled Gainda. Gainda is the story of this little girl who works in the household and is attached, and clearly a Dalit protagonist, etc., etc. I'm just, there are two versions or two different sets of translators involved. This story was translated in a collection by Saida Hamid and Sughra Mehdi in a collection titled Parvaz, which came out in the late 1990s, 96 I think. And the same story comes out in another anthology which was translated by Asaduddin, Professor M. Asaduddin, and that's titled Lifting the Veil, and that comes out early 2000s, around 2001 or something like that. What I'd like to do is just to share the equivalent lines that are there in both of these translations, and for us to reflect on what could possibly be the nuance of meaning in each of these. So when Saida Hamid and Sughra Mehdi translate a particular line, the line is, Gainda, he pinched her robust cheek. I'm going to tell Natha. And when it is translated by Asaduddin, he says, and you, Gainda, he pinched her chubby cheek. You're wasting your time here. I'm going to tell Natha. It's just that that robust cheek becomes chubby cheek, right? The other question which I think Dr. Renuka was trying to sort of get us to think about is what constitutes being a feminist. Do you require to be born female to be a feminist? You were suggesting that it need not be. That if anything, feminist thinking is a perspective which we bring to bear on whatever we are considering, under consideration. So it could as well be my father is a feminist in some aspects of his life, not necessarily in all. So if we think in those terms then, if you look at Saida Hamid and Sughra Mehdi's line, it is robust cheek. But when Asaduddin is doing it a few years later, he uses the phrase chubby cheek. And if for those of us who remember the story, it's the story of this little girl who's barely 13, 14. And she's a servant in this household. The narrator is also her playmate, and it's a story about what happens to that little girl by the young master of what she suffers there. And I would think that this translation of robust and chubby is something which is trying to indicate to us the childhood of that child. Where does it lie? Similarly, there's another set of lines. Finally, by the end of the story, or towards the second half of this, in the second half of the story, we learn that Gainda has given birth to a baby, and obviously it's for us to deduce who is the father of that child. And the narrator, who is the same age as her, and the playmate, and the brother, it's her brother who is been, well, how shall I put it now? It's very difficult to put it in terms which will not, right, he assaulted her. Let's get past that. again, the last one of the paragraphs there is, and I'll read first from Saida Hamid and Sughra Mehdi's translation. The paragraph is this: Genda looked at me carefully. She probably found what she was looking for in my eyes. With great expertise, she lifted the baby and placed him in my lap. He was light, like a wisp of cotton wool. Thin, light, tiny. I sat with him on a piece of gunny sack spread on the floor. Genda told me 100,000 strange things. How she was beaten up regularly for months. 14, 15-year-old Genda could not understand many things herself. How could she explain them to me? We stopped helplessly with what, how, why. Oh, this is how this whole understanding that we are also, as a readers, we are also being invited to share in. A few years later, when Professor Asaduddin translates the same paragraph, the same set of sentences, this is how he writes. Genda peered into my eyes, searching for something. She seemed reassured, as though she had found whatever she was looking for. She effortlessly lifted the baby and put him in my arms. I was amazed by the practiced way she did it. The baby was light as a wisp of cotton wool. I sat on the gunny sack with the baby in my lap as Gainda recorded 100,000 strange happenings. How she was beaten up for months together. Genda, hardly 14 or 15, did not herself understand many things. How could she explain them to me? We stopped invariably with how, why, how strange. There is no concluding remarks I have to make about these translations, because for me both of them are making choices which carry a different sense. As in someone who can read Urdu, though I don't have formal certification in Urdu, and work with translating, for me both of these choices carry different kinds of resonances. If you, the choice of chubby instead of robust is conveying how young that child is and how what is at work in this assault. If they end with questions like "oh," when the last exclamation in Saida Hamid and Sughra Mehdi's translation is "oh," and Asaduddin says "how strange." The "how strange" to me reads a little belabored. The "oh" is more, it carries more resonances of what these two girls, who are basically themselves probably now around 17, 18, are unable to make sense of how did this girl become pregnant and how did this baby get born and why was she beaten up in between, right? There is this whole unsaidness about it. I use this example probably just to also get at the fact that there might be these sometimes reconcilable forms of judgment that we make as readers. If we are talking about as translators, as students, as researchers, then another thing that I probably am trying to get at is how do we interact with the translated text as readers? Do I like what this translation is saying to me? Does this work for my society where I'm located now? And that question is something, can I examine something that happened in the past with the values of the present? That's also a question which may come up in terms of a discussion. It may be said, for example, that a particular perspective from today, and that perhaps is the danger or the fear of feminism that sometimes we encounter in spaces, in academic spaces, is that we are using an awareness, if we like, of saying something or questioning something which worked with a different worldview or a perspective. Today, for example, if we try to contain, or if I use the more difficult word, dismiss, we might be told that we are dismissing the victim or blaming the victim for where they find themselves, right? That's something that comes in. And then to be told that this is a familial structure, that we must work together. These are all sorts of paths that can open up more difficult questions in some ways. But the one thing that translation does is also to suggest that we need not bury the past, that the past is basically what we recover from our presence, that the past is not something dead and buried in history, that it is something we recover from our current concerns. I think Professor Sunita Rani spoke already about how translations are not only about marginalized voices or marginalized literatures, and I think somewhere my whole discussion about Emily Wilson's translation was also trying to address that kind of thing, that when women in translation, women as translators, women found in translation, if we can think in those terms, then how do we look at this in a far larger, as was being suggested by the Vice Chancellor in the morning, can we look at it as a far larger issue, that it is very, very political, that it is a question which will, that there are no texts which are not political in our literary canon. The fact that they appear to have been given and received in that fashion over a period of hundreds of years is something that we have become complacent about, perhaps. So work like that of Wilson, work like that of projects. You mentioned Zuban. I think Zuban is now involved in this whole project of women in translation. Probably your book is part of that. I'll conclude with the last sort of throwing open a question. I'm aware of two women in Urdu, and I realize I absolutely know nothing about Urdu, and I'm here in MANUU, and I'm going to take this step of talking about Urdu. But there are two women whose names that I'll bring here. One is a woman called Nishat Unisa, who is better known as Begum Hasrat Mohani. She's someone who participated in the early 20th century. She dies in 1937. So early 20th century woman who participated in strikes. 1921, she moved a resolution for complete freedom in a session of the Congress. In fact, if I remember rightly, Hasrat Mohani has said somewhere that if it was not for her, he would have remained an apolitical literary editor. He was the editor of some magazines. She has written several things, including letters when she traveled abroad and so on. Her letters have been the translation of some of her writings has been included in this huge volume called 3 Centuries of Muslim Women Travel Writing. It came out 2 or 3 years ago. So the reason I'm mentioning her is she is from somewhere in Uttar Pradesh. My ignorance about that part of the region is huge. So she's someone who is North Indian in that sense. And then I'm reminded of a woman called Sughra Humayun Mirza, who is from Hyderabad roughly around that time. Sughra Humayun Mirza is also writing, traveling, working, doing things at that same time. She dies much later in the 1950s, but she is roughly, they are contemporaries. They're born nearly, I think, a year apart. So they're contemporaries in that sense. And Sughra Humayun Mirza is also a prolific writer who wrote novels, the Safdariya School in Hyderabad, which is still running and it's famous. Someone who contributed a great deal to what today is being called the women's empowerment or upliftment or whatever. Someone who also wrote, when she traveled extensively through Europe with her husband, wrote back pieces which were published in the magazines and journals of the time as Safarnama, as travelogues, roughly. My question or my concern, something I'm thinking about right now, is also if these two women's works were to be translated into English, and I believe a couple of people are doing that, what would be the regional differences between these two? Roughly speaking, they both come from a similar class community in terms of profile, age, in terms of their exposure to learning, formal learning, etc. They come. But what would be the, sorry? Right. How would we then think about these two translations from different regions when they appear in English? And I think Professor Sunita Rani spoke about this when she mentioned the singular you and the plural you. And that would be one part of it, but also within these two kinds of similar locations, how would we understand in translation the differences that are there in their texts? Right, I'll stop here and maybe there will be a discussion and something will get picked up. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Asma Rashid. Your analysis added an important dimension to the discussion. Now we will quickly move to the panel discussion. I have some questions, but due to the paucity of time, one or two questions I want to ask to the panelists. The first question is, anybody can answer this. Does translation empower women writers or sometimes dilute their cultural specificity?
Two words that are striking in your question is empowering, diluting. Do we have to take them as boundaries is my question to you. Can't we look at them like neither diluting nor empowering? See, this is also a possibility, right? From starting from the discussions around translation theories in 18th century, we have always debated like how quote unquote faithful is the translation. I think it's one way of rendering. Okay, one more rendering of the text. There have been writers who have translated their own work into another language and then said that no, this is not translation, this is original work again, I have written in another language. So I think every translation, depending, I'm also taking it from two co-panelists, I think every translation becomes a reading, again like Spivak said, and also a rendering based on the translator's location, purpose, and ideology, and the target readers as well. I feel a little uncomfortable with the word diluting because it's a reading. Based on our location, we are reading it, we are interpreting it. It's not so much diluting. Right? So, an exact reproduction, replication of the original might also become very, very problematic. I think Ms. Asma in detail looked at the variations and different versions of translation as well. I just want to bring in here one example, if you don't mind. I'll quickly conclude it. There's a writer, activist, who has written, who has recorded the stories of women who have fought in their lives and who have emerged with their own, what do you call, quote unquote empowerment, with their own kind of resistance, protest. So she has documented their stories. And in a language that is very, very typical to that region, very typical to their times, and which is very different from the other writers who are men who have written from that region again, but the experiences and expressions are very different. Right now, I'm trying to render them into English. I'm able to understand the experience, the anguish, I'm able to translate it into but I'm not able to grasp or hold on to that very specific regional flavor. But when the writer, interestingly, the writer has not only written these stories, she has narrated them and put them up on YouTube. So actually what she has written is very different from what she is speaking. The text is the same. But just that she is narrating them, reading them out, that makes it a very different text. So going back to your empowering and diluting, it is neither empowering nor diluting, but writer herself presenting a different version of her stories, the stories that she has done. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Just 1 minute. Here, when it comes to the writers I was speaking about and the translation that I was showing her, I found the original Chandragiri edition very different from the text that has been translated. So initially as a student, I found that it has diluted. But later as a teacher, I realized that it has empowered. And if she had not diluted it, probably the readers would not have accepted it. So sometimes for the marginalized communities, especially in translation, the text empowers. But when it comes to cultural nuances, there is something which is missing. But the very attempt of translating a text, it has to be applauded. It's a hard work, it's a dedicated work, and that's a real contribution as well. So the translator is the author again. So hats off to all the translators. Thank you.
Next question is about personal experiences as a translator. I know all of you have translated. So when you translate women writers, how do you deal with gender, language, and she used the word cultural nuance. So how do you deal with this gender, language, and cultural nuances?
Gender and cultural nuances. I would think that that's something that works whether one is a man or a woman, the author or the translator. It is at work, it is not absent if a man is the author or a man is the translator or being made. I can take the example again of Gogu Shamla's work, which was translated into English. The translator of this particular work, and I was the series editor for the books that came out, and Shamla's work is part of that series. It was very difficult in the sense, the translator said, that Shamla uses a particular Telangana Telugu, which is wholly different from the mainstream, academic, proper, standard, all those kinds of words. It was different from that. So in order to translate into Urdu, she had to, the translator is also a woman, she had, and herself a writer, so she had to negotiate past all of that in order to arrive at a language which would make sense. And Shamla is also writing the content and the context of her story is also to do with being Dalit in rural Telangana at a particular point in time. And she herself said later that this world no longer exists. These paddy fields, these spaces, these trees that she's writing about in her story, they have been taken over by industrialization, the spreading city, and so on and so forth. So when the translator did this translation, she had to find vocabulary that Urdu had to make space in Urdu for those kinds of nuances, the festivals, the labor, the food, the celebratory aspect. And I'm thinking of one story, there's a particular story called Tataki, which in Urdu is translated as Tataki Phir Jeet Gayi. And so the fact that the girl is the hero of the story, this child, Taki is this young girl, just a child, and how she overpowers and works very cleverly, she's very capable. Does Urdu have the at that present time of time, can it carry the cultural nuance of that world? So that was a struggle for the translator, and when it came to us for editing, we had to go back. Luckily for us, we are in Hyderabad, we could consult the Telugu, we could consult the author, we could have conversations and make decisions about how some things were happening and how could we represent it in Urdu. So those were negotiations which happened through discussions, and that is of course quite a privilege to be able to do it when working. It may not always be possible. But I think, yes, it makes a text very, it requires an effort of the reader. I can think of another story in that series which is by Du Saraswati, who is a Kannada writer. Right? And now she again writes about a rural landscape. It has an aji and it has children, and the children come home, go from Bangalore to the village to visit their aji, etc., etc. And there are foods, and there is a festival, and there is a lot of celebration happening, but the particularities of that context are not available in Urdu. And I think that is one of the jobs of, one of the tasks or one of the demands of translation itself, that we bring new worlds into our own spaces and learn, make the effort to learn those new worlds, not make them easily available. A good translation does not always necessarily make things easily available for consumption in that way. So I think translation negotiates cultural nuance in each context differently.
Just to add a bit to it, there is a short story by Vaidehi, Gulabi Thakur, wherein in that community, the protagonist craze for theatre, entertainment, it is critiqued as such, but when the theatre opens up in that village, she becomes a gatekeeper and she has access to watch the plays every day. But later when it is translated into another medium, in a film, like an episode also, in a movie as well, there, what the translator, the director, the screenwriter, or the scriptwriter, they do is, instead of the theatre, that's the T. The T replaces the theatre, theatre replaces the T. So such translations, such languages also are happening. Just trying to cater to the needs of the present times. Yes, contextualized.
Now, talking about cultural specificities, I have two writers in mind, I translated recently. One is a Dalit feminist woman writer, Jupaka Subhadra, who has written a column. And then the other writer is a singer, songwriter, poet, Goriti Venkana, again from a Dalit context, from Telangana. Both of them more or less emerge from the same context. The cultural specificities are the same, but the genres are different, the concerns are different, the tone is different. While Subhadra uses a very critical tone on movement, on Telangana building, on Dalit feminist perspective, Goriti Venkana from the same context uses critical perspective, critical tone at the urbanization, market culture, disappearing human values. Exactly the same location. But the identities, even the identities carry the same identities more or less except for the gender difference. The genres and the tone make a huge difference. Also, one quick thing, we are talking about women writers and women translators. What if women are translating men? What happens there? You know, how does this quote unquote woman handling happens when a woman is translating a man? I have translated two texts. One is a collection of short fiction by a writer who was an active member of progressive Progressive Women Writers Association in Telugu, and the other writer is Goreti Venkanna. So it's also interesting to see because it's a reversal of the notion of power, whether it is in writing or translation as well. Thank you.
We wind up the discussion here. In conclusion, I would like to say, as this discussion showed, translation is not just a linguistic transfer, it's a political engagement. I thank the panelists for their stimulating discussion and audience for patient listening. Thank you.
As Michelle Obama once said, there is no limit to what we, as women, can accomplish. This is powerful thought reminds us of the strength, creativity, and resilience that women bring to every field, including literature. What a wonderful and engaging discussion we have just witnessed. It has been a stimulating exchange of ideas. I would like to sincerely thank you, Chairperson, Professor Parande, and our three respected speakers for sharing their valuable ideas. Thank you, ma'am. And their thoughts have helped us reflect deeply on women's writing and the power of translation. Today's discussion also reminds us how translation brings people together. Through translation, voices from different languages and cultures are able to reach us. It allows us to sit in the same room, listen to each other's stories, and understand experiences that come from different parts of India or the world. In this way, translation becomes more than a literary practice. Thank you. Now we will take a break for a lunch and we will come back by 2:15. Thank you so much. And after that, we will have a video by Dr. Nandini Sahu. So I hope you all will come back. Thank you so much. Is it on?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shahana Shireen, Research Scholar in the Department of English. On behalf of the department, I welcome you to the plenary session of this one-day national symposium, Women Writing in India, Contemporary Perspectives and New Aesthetics, organized by Department of English, Maulana Azad National Urdu University in collaboration with Sahitya Academy, Delhi. It's my honor to now introduce you all to the chair of the session, Professor Nikhila H., Professor in the Department of Film Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Her research interests include remakes and adaptation, gender and cinema, Indian film cultures, and multimodal translation. She has published books, articles in journals, e-magazines, and book chapters on cinema and gender. She has been a jury member for Toto Funds the Arts TFA Short Films Awards for 2022. She is co-convener of an online film discussion forum called Talking Films Online. She is currently researching on her New Age Kannada cinema for a collaborative volume on new cinemas of India. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today, and I welcome you to the dais. Now I would like to introduce you to the key discussants joining us for this session, Professor Ipshita Chanda from IFLU, Hyderabad, and Dr. Melissa Helen from Osmania University, Hyderabad. Professor Ipshita Chanda is from the Department of Comparative Literature at EFLU University. Her areas of interest include plurality and ethics, virtuality and alterity in transcultural contexts, Francophone and Anglophone African literature and drama. South and West Asian contextual relations also falls in her research interest. She held the ICCR Chair of Indian Culture at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. in 2013-14. Dr. Melissa Helen is an associate professor of English at Osmania University, Hyderabad. Her expertise is in teaching British poetry, American literature, African American literature, and Indian writing English. She was awarded the Excellence in Research Award in 2022 from Osmania University. Ma'am, thank you for joining us today. I now invite Dr. Geeta for felicitating the honorable guest. All three. I invite Geeta ma'am to felicitate Professor Nikhila. Thank you for joining us today, and over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, without much ado, I think we should go into the sessions. We are eagerly waiting to listen to the speakers. I now invite Professor Ipshita Chanda to make her presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. I'll really go straight into the thing because I'm basically trying to make a point, well, a theoretical point in a certain way, but I would prefer to think that it's a philosophical point about writing. And we talked about, you know, the different questions that arise in terms of translation and whether, you know, certain things dilute or intensify, and what are political nuances and cultural choices. And the argument I'm trying to make is that this works for not necessarily only translation, but for the way in which we read writing. And when we add, you know, the word woman to writer, a lot of women, quote unquote, writers are quite uncomfortable with the fact that, you know, in most Indian languages you can translate, not really translate, you can add an A or an E to a word gendered male in order to make it female. So, I mean, you know, the word lekhika, for example, in Bengali has for the last about 30 years been questioned constantly. That what difference does it make? And what I'm trying to argue is that the discourse of Indian aesthetics, that is writing in Indian languages, is formed out of conversations between traditions and structures of feeling across language cultures. We talked a lot about that in the morning, that the same language may be spoken differently across what one immediately identifies as a social hierarchy. So the act of comparison is fundamentally an act of relation. It is a state of being willing to open oneself to the precarious possibilities brought by the other. And as such, it is not applicable exclusively to avowedly plural societies alone, like those in South Asia or India. But in the existing discourses of the mainstream, margin, center, periphery, etc., the terms of the discussion have been set around the institutionalized idea of monocultural nation, monolithic, monolingual society, which is why we always talk in terms of binaries. It is either this or that. So, in the colonizing master discourse, this homogeneous unity is assumed to be normal, and deviations from this so-called normal being abnormal and hybrid, fragmented, or impure. I emphasize the prescriptive, punitive morality implied in deviations, because you assume that there is a standard which is accepted by everyone when you call something a deviation. So, South Asia is defined by language cultures instead of territories, in an area characterized by common languages, cultures, and religions across geopolitical boundaries. So, South Asian nations share national languages, like Bengali, for instance, is spoken in Bangladesh and in Bengal. So, we also discussed this, that how does the culture influence the language that is spoken? I mean, the Bengali that is spoken in Bangladesh is quite different from the Bengali that is spoken in Bengal. So, basically what I'm trying to argue is that literature, whether it is written by women or men, questions the parochial rituals of purity and constructed standards, animating a plurilingual, pluricultural, relational world which we call India. So I'm saying that India is by definition a plural nation, a plural society. And this is where I would like to go back to tradition. And there are two different picturizations, or figuration, I think is the better word, of Devi. One is in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, which is, the 125th Sukta, which is the Vak Sukta or the Devi Sukta. And here, the speaker is a woman. She is Amrini, the daughter of a sage, but she speaks in her own voice. And she says, I am the sovereign queen, the collectress of treasures, cognizant of the supreme being, the chief of objects of worship. As such, the gods have put me in many places, abiding in manifold conditions, entering into numerous forms. And I underline this idea of plurality in the title, and plurality of gender specifically, because any gendered society which is aware of the fact of gender, which is very much present in our daily interactions, especially through language, is necessarily a plural society, whether it accepts that or not. So, here in the Vak Sukta, the word Devi is used, and this Devi is speaking for herself. She is saying, as I just quoted, and I'm not going to subject you to my bad Sanskrit, but she says, Ahameva swayamidam vadami. So, I am talking about myself. I verily of myself declare this. I am saying that I exist in everything. Then she starts talking about, every single aspect of creation in which she states that I am present. And she keeps underlining this continuously. Now, an imposition or an example of the imposition of patriarchal figuration can be seen in the transformation of the Devi of the Rig Veda from the Vak Sukta into the Tantrokta Devi Suktam, which comes from the Markandeya Puran. And the Devi Sukta cited in the Tantra, which is Tantrokta Devi Suktam, The Tantra cited Devi is connected to the Devi Suktam of the Devi Mahatmya, which is a particular genre, the Mahatmya, from the Markandeya Puran. So here you have the story of Shiva invoking the goddess through tantric ritual, which is also found in Devi Purana, dated to the 6th century CE. Thus, the structure of feeling shifts from the Vedic, where Devi speaks in her own voice and asserts the fact that she is present in creation, that she is a force of creation, to the Tantrokta Devi Sukta, in which she becomes a goddess. Okay. So, in the Rahasyas appended to the Devi Mahatmya text of 6 CE, the greatness of the Devi in all her incarnations was described to the devotees, who then demanded, "You have told us the avtaras, now tell us the Prakriti, the main form and the worshipable form of the goddess." So Devi is no longer a woman, she has become a goddess, and the entire Devi Sukta, the Tantrokta Devi Sukta, is an eulogy to a divine being rather than the speech of a woman, speaking about her own power and her own knowledge. So, the different and complementary roles played by differently sexed bodies in the generation and nurture of the species is imagined through specification of energy as female, also emphasizing natural plurality through the ideal of the complementarity of genders. This signification changes with the structure of feeling. Another repertoire of signification around the same figure becomes dominant, re-articulated in response to the changed situation. In the Vak Sukta, the speaking voice of Vagambruni announces herself as equal in power to the other gods. She says, "Aham Rudrebhi Vasubhi Charami Aham Aditya Ut Vishvadevai Aham." So I am, then she goes on about Mitra, Varuna, everybody. I move along with the Rudras, the Vasus, the Aditas, and all the other Devas. I bear the Mitra, Varuna, Indra, Agni, and the 2 Ashwini Devas. So the speaker here is a Vedic seer of an identified lineage. We know who her father is. She herself enumerates her powers. She is, this is an Atma Stuti, and she is a Vidushi. So she is in fact a Brahma Vidushi. A Brahma Vidushi is someone who has knowledge of Brahman. So she is in the Devi Mahatmya, however, she is the same word Devi is imagined as the embodiment of all that is metaphysical, including Jati. The female speaker, that is Vak, who describes her power as her own abilities and experiences, becomes silent when she is eulogized as a goddess who is an embodiment of these powers. The personal, unique singularity of an active human subject is overwritten by an objectified divine figure. Through the change of genre, which Sunita was talking about in the morning, from the Atmastuti of the Vedic seer to the eulogy of the devotee, we can discern the dominant structure of feeling, allowing the ritualistic deification of women in a patriarchal caste society. The individual Vagambruni, daughter of a seer herself, is a human who speaks of herself as a goddess, but when she is figured as a goddess, she is stripped of her confidence and self-pride. She becomes the bearer of what her worshippers, mainly male, want her to symbolize. And as you know, that the Devi Sukta, the Tantrokta Devi Sukta says, Shakti Rupena Sangsthita, Bhranti Rupena Sangsthita, everything. There's about from verse 6 to verse 16, 10 verses of where she is there, Sangsthita, how she is constructed. And everything is constructed through her. Despite that, ultimately, she is present everywhere, and I'll just read that to you. Indrayanam adhishthatri bhutanam chakhileshu ya bhuteshu satatam tasya vyapte daivya namo nama. So there is a divinity involved in you. You are not a human being that we are talking about. So you are idealized, basically. So the feminine principle is also language, but it is not her voice that we can hear any longer. She speaks in the voice that men give her. Now, the interesting part about Vak or language in Indian aesthetics is the fact that Vak is described as light. Dandi says that Vak is Jyoti and states that the three worlds would have been thrown into darkness had there been no light called Shabd. And similarly, Bhartrihari also asserts that all knowledge is illumined through words, and it is not quite possible to have cognition that is free from words. Actually, the English and Foreign Languages University, the emblem says words illumine everything. And words are, in the understanding of both Dandi and Bhartrihari, a female principle, traced back to Ambruni rather than the Devi of the Mahatmya. So, the change in genre from Atmastruti to Mahatmya indicates the process of resignification, a change of what can be done with language itself, even when women do not have the power to control it, or when they have only the power to control it by resignification. In a changed structure of feeling with different regulative beliefs, the voice of a woman has been reified and forced to divinity, which is itself a generic characteristic of patriarchy. The relation of this shift to the state of women in our rapidly homophobizing racist society today makes the process of overwriting a means to preserve plurality from an existential and critical point of view. Overwriting tradition is thus not an exclusively female or feminine project. As a literary device desiring a particular aesthesis, however, it is ethical and political, and therefore a feminist project rather than a feminine one. There are in Indian language literatures more than 300 Rama stories. The existing, or in Shishir Kumar Das's words, the inherited text does not cease to exist. Rather, the contemporary or emergent text is formed because the residual elements of the inherited text must remain in the contemporary text to be resignified by the female writer. So these 300 Rama stories, none of them is the Ramayana, by the way. There is only one Valmiki Ramayana. So they follow the basic outline of Valmiki, who wrote the, and I emphasize the definite article, the Ramayana. Though called a Ramayana, Valmiki's plot interpretation of the story told to him by Narada when he requests a hero does not feature Rama at all. So his aim in writing the Ramayana is, according to him, when he teaches Kush and Love the story of Rama, and they have to, propagate it to all the different courts. He says you can go and sing it everywhere. The point of the story, the poet explains, is describing the greatness of Sita's character and the destruction of Ravana. These are the two aims of his kavya. This is Adikanda. So Valmiki's task is not to tell an original story. Any narrative is composed out of a set of what Barth calls kernels, events which are so essential to the plot that their removal would destroy the logic of the narrative. For without these kernels, the events forming the plot could not be connected together in a coherent manner. Kernels are the building blocks of an other narrative when they are rearranged in different ways, that is told from different perspectives. So the perspective, intentionality, and position of the individual author are evident in the shape the story takes through the arrangement which reveals the relative importance of the kernels and the shifting emphasis indicating a shift in perspective. I'm especially honored to be speaking about this here because my friend, colleague, and fellow traveler, Nobunita Devshin, showed us the way towards what I call overwriting. And one of the primary source materials that she used were the Telugu Sita songs that she collected, and people here as well as in HCU helped her to translate. So she was one of the foremost of contemporary Indian language writers, men and women. She collected songs about Rama and Sita. We were talking about human relationships in the morning. Inherited by ordinary women across the country, and she herself translated the 16th century writer Chandrabhoti's overwriting of the Rama story into English. and wrote an entire volume of stories entitled Beginning with Sita, Shita Theke Shuru. From writing the afterword to her translation of Chandravati, and from translating some of the pieces collected in Shita Theke Shuru, emerged my ideas of gendered overwriting as a means of understanding the plural aesthetics of Indian languages. As I mentioned before, all rewriting of inherited texts is not necessarily overwriting. For example, Atakuri Mulla, credited with writing the Mulla Ramayana in Telugu, did not change the kernels of the Rama story as Chandravati did. Commentators say that Mulla's achievement was to convert the received idiom from Sanskrit to Telugu. And the fact that she, a woman of the Potter caste, was educated enough to write from a Sanskrit model was seen as achievement enough for a mere woman. But when Chandravati overwrites the Rama story, the narrative begins with the birth of Sita. And Chandravati dispenses with the core of the epic, actually the core of the epic as far as even the mainstream Krittibashi Ramayana is concerned. And Krittibash writes in Bengali, but his text is not called Ramayana, it is called Ram Panchali. Panchali is a different genre altogether. So the centerpiece of the Mulla Ramayana is the battle. The centerpiece of Krittibash's rendering of the Rama story into Bengali is also the battle. Ram Ravaner Juddho, that is the battle between Rama and Ravana, is an idiom in Bengali, which Chandravati discards completely. So she has two main sections. One is the destruction of Golden Lanka, where the reader knows that Sita will be held captive, and she has Ravana, the great hero, who was fated to be defeated. Chandravati describes Ravana at the beginning of her narration as a likely hero. However, he is debased by a single sin, that of defiling and insulting Lakshmi through his violent arrogance. Hubris enters the story as a male character, which unfolds against a background different from Valmiki's, as it has begun from a different point with a different hero, with Ravan and his downfall rather than Rama and his victory. In Valmiki, the greatness of Rama is obliquely described, but as far as Chandravati is concerned, she is talking about the way in which Sita is born in the womb of Mandodari as an egg. Now this egg, it is prophesied, is going to destroy Ravan. So Ravan feels that this egg should be destroyed in itself. Now Mandodari wants that it is a child of her womb after all, so she does not want it to be destroyed, but Ravan forces her to do this. And so the egg curses Ravan, saying that I will in fact come back to destroy you. So the egg is, floated away in the water, and it is picked up by the wife of a charioteer. Her name is Shota. And later on she demands that this particular child who is born from the egg should be named after her. And the child demands, or there is, what you call instruction from the heavens, which say that the child should be given over to a royal family. So Shota takes the child born out of the egg to the queen of Mithila. And the only condition she places on the queen of Mithila, she gives up the child, but she says the only thing that I want is that the child should be named after me. So Shota's child is Sita. And of course, this is what Chandravati calls Sita's Janam Leela instead of Rama's. And so this takes care of both of these aspects, you see, the greatness of Sita and the destruction of Ravan. Now, the difficulty is that I want to read you a little bit about the idea of the avatar, which I mean, I have completely lost the quotation at the moment, but the quotation that I would like to, really read comes from Krishna Sopti's work, which is called Zindagi Nama. Now, here I found it. So I'll just read you this bit about who is an avatar. And Zindagi Nama is set in Punjab. And the focus of the entire, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Nama. One of the things that we know about it is we generally associate the word Nama with a long, long story. It's not a single layered story at all. So when we are talking about Zindagi Nama, basically we're talking about human lives. And so in the beginning of this, there is a particular section in which the creation story of gendered beings, male and female, is told. And I quote here, "Every being is an avatar, a reincarnation of their father. Remember, an avatar is one who has 2 hands and 2 feet. An avatar is he who has a mouth and a head, a body, front and back. An avatar is he who irrigates the land after plowing it, satisfies it, sows seeds, harvests crops. The earliest avatar is Prajapati." And here is where you have that question about male or female, right? So this is I've translated this as deftly as I can. Prajapati was itself both male and female. It divided itself into 2 parts. Then was born a cow and a bull. Then was born the creation tree, under which collected herds of cows and bulls. And the world, our earth, grew from that creation tree. Then came the 4 directions and then the sky. When all was fixed, then Devatas began to be born. A young person listening to the story comes to the conclusion, then we are the Devta, we are the avatar. And the storyteller says, "Na Putarji, Devta apne muh se apne ko Devta nahi kehte." The gods don't call themselves gods with their own tongues. In Chandrabhati's retelling of the Ramayana, the divine presence is female, auspicious rather than powerful, which opens to the reader and the audience a threshold of experience hitherto alien to the Mahakavya. The aim of the epic remains the same, but the destruction of Golden Lanka results from an insult to Lakshmi, the auspicious and bountiful form of the divine. A contemporary woman writer's description of the emergence of the world brings both male and female into being at once, establishes a relation between them, creates a collective of beings dependent upon a natural world in which humans are born in the shape of gods. Every human, a reincarnation of the seed that brought them into being. Every god imagined as a human. And the divine virtue of humility, that is, gods don't proclaim their non-biological status from their own mouths, makes a human godlike. This is how the book of life is written. Not a man's or a woman's world, but one in which there is complementarity, relation, humility, and collectivity. A similar humanization occurs in the overwriting of the Rama matter by Nabonita Debshin. In referring to the volume entitled Shita Theke Shuru, starting from Sita, I consider overwriting as without the kernels of what Shishir Kumar Das calls the inherited text, the emergent or contemporary text has no political or aesthetic resonance. Shita Theke Shuru had a number of stories from the epics, which overwrote every story told from the hero's and his male narrator's perspective. Some of them, not many of them, have been translated actually. Some of them were called the Mool Ramayana, and Navnita Di herself wanted to call it the Ur Ramayana in translation. Sita enters the netherworld, Shitar Patal Pravesh, the story of Urmila, Lakshman's neglected wife, and the defacement of Shurpanakha, celebrated in the epic as Rama's commitment to his wife, but satirized by Devsen as belittling a woman's desire as immoral. In the preface to the 2nd volume of her poetry, Ms. Militancy, entitled Should You Take Offense, Meena Kandaswamy writes, "You are the repressed Ram from whom I run away repeatedly. My Ramayana is retold in 3 different ways. I work to not only get back at you, I actually fight to get back to myself. Devsen cast a humorous and often satirical eye at this fight, in which men and women were recruited by gendered socialization as enemies living in relation to each other. The gender economy of society was the object of her humor, as she too overwrote in that same collection, Shita Theke Shuru, the patriarchal family structure of a conjugal couple and their children. This hegemonic gender organization and domestic economy, still prevalent in the early 90s when the book first came out, was obliquely satirized by Devsen's untranslatable coinage, matriyarchy. And I shall end with the multiple aesthetic resonance that this coinage introduced into the mainstream of Bengali literature, contributing to the aesthetics and politics of overwriting as a feminist, not feminine by any means, as the feminine refuses to be reduced to abstraction. Devsen lived with her mother and 2 daughters in a house called Bhalobasha, meaning literally love, Bhalobasha, and Bhalobasha, Bhalo meaning good, Basha meaning nest. The word Basha or nest is often used in Bengali to indicate a small, cozy home, away from the swirling, teeming, complex life in a large joint family in the village, also known as Desher Badi. The Basha was often the home set up by the white-collar, urbanizing middle-class male in Calcutta. But the progressive, decolonizing Bhadralok culture remained largely heteronormative, patriarchal, and man-centered. Yarki in Bengali means a light-hearted, frivolous joke. When joined to the word matri or mother, it literally means joking with or about mother. But if imagined in English, matriarchy invokes matriarchy, the mundane reality of her woman-centered family, often compared with the patriarchal normal of Indian society, which makes goddesses of women, wants to save the girl child by educating her, and then grants bail to child molesters and garlands convicted rapists when they are pardoned. Writers, who happen to be women, thus overwrite patriarchal traditions, masquerading as divine, using gendered poetics to invoke the aesthetics of plurality, equality, and complementarity. Thank you.
I think this has, set us all thinking in so many different ways, set us thinking of women and writing. The sense of women writing that we began with in the first session, where it seemed to suggest that the writers are women is itself, beginning to get problematized with Ipshita's presentation now. She began with this idea of discomfort that women writers seem to have, to be described as, women writers. So what is this act of writing, or in other words, what is this act of writing back to tradition, or what she called as overwriting? Ipshita took us through an elaborate set of texts, beginning with the Rig Veda, the Vak Sukta, the Devi Mahatme. In a way, I think the Devi Mahatme, with the deification of the woman, as opposed to the Vak Sukta, where the woman is speaking her own voice, or in her own voice, the Atmastuti, the speech versus someone else speaking for or over her, as the Mahatme, the eulogy. So one would think, this has been one of the most erudite problematizations of this idea of deification. I mean, as women, we all know what patriarchy tries to achieve by deification. Here, through this kind of close textual reading, Ipshita took us to what it means for men, to voice over women and grant her the position of goddess. From there, she took us, to the many Ramayanas, and particularly to the Ramayanas where Sita is foregrounded and the fall of Ravana. So it's not about Rama. I think there are many resonances, particularly in today's context. The many resonances that her reading of some of these texts carry. The kind of violence that is associated with the Purushottam Rama as the male par excellence, to these texts where Sita, her origin, her predilections are foregrounded rather than Rama, and also about the hubris of Ravana and Sita in some ways being responsible for the end of Ravana. The point that she was making is, this seminar is about the aesthetics of women's writing. So she's bringing two, and as I understood it, two very nuanced aspects together. One is, this understanding of plurality, the process of overwriting tradition, and why it is important to conceptualize this plurality as overwriting a hegemonic text. And also this sense of gender, the concept of gender, not as a feminine project, that women are writing it and therefore it is overwriting, but as a feminist project of overwriting in order to erase a kind of patriarchal or patriarchy-centric worldview or understanding. I think some of the points that Ipshita made are extremely important for today's context, for all of us to think about. I invite you all to respond to, comment on, ask questions, so that we can have a conversation of a few minutes, maybe if another 5 or 6 minutes, maybe a couple of questions, so that what she read out as a paper, she may engage through questions in a more lucid form, particularly for all the research scholars and others present here. So if there are any questions, please go ahead. Most welcome to ask 1 or 2 questions at this point. Okay. So in which case, please keep your questions. If you want to take some time to formulate your questions, please do that. In the meanwhile, we will go on to the next paper. Has the next paper presenter been introduced? Yeah. So I invite Dr. Melissa Helen from Osmania University to now make her presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon, and I guess this is the last session for the day, but it's equally challenging to keep ourselves engaged post-lunch session, but I would like to thank Professor Ipshita for the insights she threw on the various versions and how easily we fall victims of being deified. It's very easy for men to polarize us either into a demon or a deity, and either way we are rendered helpless. So from the title and the angle that I would like to deal with, I have taken poetry, and then as students of literature, we all remember the famous words of Wordsworth, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, emotions recollected in tranquility. But then when we are dealing with poetry written by women whose identity has been erased, destroyed, voices have been silenced, bodies have been mutilated, can we really expect the traditional kind of poetry that Eurocentric, androgynic, traditional forms of poetry that have been read by us when we were students of post-graduation? If we all recollect, I don't think we have come across some of the kinds of poetry that we are reading today by the voices that are representing what they have gone through. Pope also said poetry is what oft was thought but never well so expressed. So it has to be something that is really, really expressive of what the women have gone through. An interesting quotation I've come across by Oscar Wilde is when he says, all bad poetry springs from genuine feeling. Very interesting to observe that when you look at, and to come to the exact poet that I have chosen to cut down on all these issues of coming down and traversing from margins to mainstream, Dalit, Adivasi and minority women's voices that I've chosen to dwell upon this afternoon. I would like to focus mostly on Meena Kandaswamy's poetry. And for a moment, my heart was skipping a few beats when Ipshita referred to the introduction. However, so we've had illustrious personalities so far in the day, especially writers like Gogu Shamla, and we've also read literature by Mashweta Devi, especially, I don't know, and I hope some of you remember her short story Dopti, a very interesting way in which she makes women as an agency of her own power, where she rewrites everything. So what is it that these women have to deal with when they are dealing with a stance where they have been silenced to become their assertive selves? And then when these women face oppressions of various kinds, we've only heard of double jeopardy, and at the most we have extended it to triple jeopardy, but then the various oppressions that these women face and the intersections of patriarchy, gender, class, caste, economic and other physical batter that they go through. So how do they still make sense of life? And it's not just revisioning and overwriting that ma'am has talked about. I think we have to really congratulate these women for transforming and creating a space of their own where they have become voices to be heard and forces to be reckoned with on at a universal level. So we've had writers talking about Adivasi rights, land rights, but then when it comes to Meena Kandaswamy, to nail my talk, I'm skipping out so many things. I just want to focus on Meena Kandaswamy, the Tamil poet, translator, and also activist. She's known for writing about caste oppression, gender violence, and political resistance. And her poetry illustrates how marginalized voices challenge literary power structures. That's why I've spent a little bit of time on going through the literary canon of poetry and the kind of expectations that a Western male literary tradition would expect of a good poet. So her works shows how literature can move from silence and exclusion to visibility and influence. So I would like to focus on Meena Kandaswamy's poetry as poetry of a resistance. So what is it that she's resisting? She's resisting patriarchy, she's resisting traditional forms of writing, she's resisting the religious ideology that's imposed, especially in a nation like India. She's of course resisting the literary ideologies and the societal expectations that is thrust upon a woman. If you look at some of her poems, I'm carrying her book. I hope some of you have read her poems, and very chilling and disturbing, because she uses raw and visceral images to make her point that is very, very vital. I don't think any of us would expect to come across this kind of poetry being written, published, and also now being a part of the literary canon in universities. So she has really made a great mark. So she criticizes the elitism of literary culture when she gives a kind of a preface, when she says, "My Kali kills, my Draupadi strips, my Sita climbs on to a stranger's lap, all my women militate." So that's the kind of poetry that you come across when she takes different characters in her poems. And her poetry is not just like her writings. She has also written novels, autobiographical novel. So her writing is not just about a community biography that we come across in Baby Kamble's The Prisons We Broke. So they're not just representative of a community of Dalit women, but each individual that she talks about is very unique. So when she talks about, she says, "I choose my words, coarse as the corned Kannagi's colorful curses." That set me off to do a little bit of research about who Kannagi is and what all she was subject to. So her poetry questions why marginalized writers are expected to write only about suffering. So she not only writes about suffering, but she also makes it a point to inflict suffering, curse, destruction on the male society around us. She exposes literary institutions which control what is considered good literature. So she challenges caste privileges, and she questions the literary gatekeeping tradition of European or the hegemonical dominant ways of writing. And then she demands equal space in the mainstream literary world. So when we look at one or two, maybe if time permits, I don't know, we are running out, we are running a little behind the schedule. Dr. Geeta might alert us about the time that we can take. Sorry? Okay, then I better hurry up. So when you look at her poem titled, even the titles of her poems are very interesting. A cunning stunt is actually can be read as a pun, because later on through the poem, fourth stanza or fourth verse of the poem, she talks about the cunt, which now becomes seat, abode, home, lair, nest, stable. Then the way she vividly depicts, despite the women being treated as a sexual object, she tries to take control of this entire situation, and then she says, I cannot walk away, I'm frightened, I turn frigid, I turn faker. How the women who are torn apart to contain the meanings of family, race, stock, and caste. These are the typical names and the terms that the patriarchal society thrusts at us to keep us in our place. Then Meena's poetry can also be read as feminist reinterpretation of tradition. When you look at some, maybe a few lines, there are lots, but then this poem, especially titled Firewalkers, talks about this incident in MANUU massacre, where Dalit agricultural laborers were killed overnight just because they were asking for some better working conditions. So she talks about here, I'm just reading the last few lines. Mari had a one-point goal. Mari had a manic soul. Mari made her men wage war with her rapist's blood to drench her hair. And then, as these stories go, Mari, with her heart of stone, combed her hair with his left thigh bone. So we wouldn't expect women to come out and then talk about all these things that she has been subjected to with such vivid images and unsettling images too for that. So when she reimagines mythological female figures as powerful and rebellious, when I just read my Sita, my Draupadi kills, they're not the regular passive women. So we can look at her poetry as poetry of anger, poetry of violence, poetry of not just resistance. And then, so for her, literature and poetry becomes a record of injustice and a form of resistance against historical erasure. Many times, some of these atrocities that have been committed against the Dalits, and especially the women and the children who can't run away into the forest. I hope some of us are familiar with the Karam Chedu incident in Orissa too. So unfortunately, it is the women and the children who bear the brunt of all these instances of violence. So, but then they just become erased from the history. But then Meena has made a tremendous effort put in to create a memory to the suppressed histories of these women. So we can see that anger has a feminist power when she says we will not be tamed. So instead of having women who are subservient, so we find her women rejecting traditional expectations of obedience and silence, and anger becomes a tool of empowerment rather than something to suppress. So moving from margins to mainstream also means changing who gets to speak and whose stories matter. So for writers like Meena, it's not that margins do not merely seek entry into mainstream. It is reshaping the mainstream literature by confronting society with uncomfortable truths. That is the need of the hour. So I would like to conclude saying, though there are a lot of references that I'm skipping, so when she celebrates rebellious women, in one of her poems she says, this is how we are. We are not the chaste women that you would ever like to get married to, but then we are the sluts, and if you want, you accept us, but this is how we will be. So she makes no bones about, of course, they didn't become sluts by chance. They were forced into all these things. But then she makes, she renders no apologies for their life, but then she acclaims it despite whatever she's gone through. So by allowing her poetry directly to link her personal experiences with political expression, she uses her anger to become both a creative and a transformative force. So, and celebrating female anger and resistance, where traditional narratives are reinterpreted from feminist politics, she brings in subversion of norms, and she encourages a militant stance by the women characters she talks about. She rejects patriarchal expectations. Then she also celebrates how poetry can empower women to social norms, especially when she uses body politics in her poetry. Some of them I don't want to read out, though I have made some points from her poems, because when she turns female body into a site of battle rather than a commodity, where and then she uses transformative from a submissive wife to a vengeful militant one. So she is one woman force to be reckoned with, a one woman poet that we should all really appreciate. And as she transforms the literature into a space of resistance and empowerment by amplifying Dalit voices. We've had a lot of writers, especially Dalit women writing, but then she has amplified and then she strengthened the feminist discourse that also matters to the current mainstream literature. And her style is a style of direct confrontational style, and then she breaks all poetic conventional expectations, and her poetry intentionally rejects polite literary language when she uses what you and I would normally call or as words or language which is taboo or unacceptable. So her transformation, she has transformed poetry into moving from margins to become mainstream by breaking restrictive norms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melissa. It was a very insightful presentation, looking at the way, taking the case study of Meena Kandaswamy's poetry, looking at the way in which some of these poems negotiate with or rather overwrite the canon. So in a way, I think you in some ways brought the reason why a seminar like this is necessary and is happening in the English department, which has its traditional set of texts which are read and appreciated, and why today we need to focus attention on new writers and new kinds of writing, not for its own sake, but for the way in which in some ways they speak to our contemporary experiences. Probably they speak to the contemporary context in very strong, with very strong voices. Both the papers are now open for discussion. If you have any questions, you're most welcome. maybe I'll just open the discussion with a couple of questions, one to Ipshita and one to Dr. Melissa. So I was thinking, Ipshita, about this idea of overwriting tradition. In some ways, I can see the need for a project, particularly at this point in time, for something like this. But I can also, I think, understand that maybe at this point in time, when Rama is everywhere, foregrounding traditions which celebrate Sita or celebrate the predilections of Sita. I mean, so I can understand where this need is coming from. My question is, how do we, bring this or foreground this and bring it into conversation with the celebration of Ram that we see everywhere. So is the reading, so while the writing is overwriting, so is the reading in conversation with the canon, or is it in its own in a sense, is it going in its own specialized kind of a reading that scholars alone have access to? Ramayana as an epic is something that probably everyone here will lay claim to. But what about this tradition of text, or this tradition of overwriting texts? How significance of it I know, but how significant it is in the contemporary context. So that is one. And ma'am, in terms of Dalit writing, and I'm sure you had a whole set of texts that you wanted to speak about. For paucity of time, you brought in Meena Kandaswamy. Meena Kandaswamy is also extremely popular among young people. So maybe it is important for us to reimagine. You also teach in OU in the English department. Maybe it is time for us to also reimagine the function of literature in contemporary times. So not just have one poet among 20 others who are canonical. So if you can tell us how you're negotiating with this. So Meena would be just one among the many others who are the canonical writers whom you would be teaching, right? So how do you expect students to negotiate with one writer who seems to so radically stand out from the canon? Yeah, just to get the conversation going. If there are any more questions, we'll take those questions after this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy for me to answer that, and in fact, I'll answer Dr. Melissa's the question you asked her also. The simple, yeah, it's, you see, I've taught comparative literature for 33 years, and ours is a discipline which does not recognize a canon. And so it is not a conversation that is new or isolated or one. We have taught this for 33 years, so it's very easy. As far as the discipline and the philosophy of comparative literature is concerned, it is exactly answering what you are asking for. That there is no mainstream. We make mainstreams. So it is up to us. And you're right that it is the reading that we are interested in, not any received canon or tradition, which requires actually
thank you, Professor Nikila and Professor Shita, for the valuable insights you brought and also the questions which probe us to think of how we can counter these questions of reading something which is not in the so-called accepted canon. Because I know at a few places like the University of Hyderabad and a few central universities and EFLU, you have your own, you can come up with your, the course instructor can come up with your own syllabus, the text that you would like to read. But then teachers like us who teach in a traditional university where we have the syllabus approved by the BOS and all that. So what we do is we don't have some of these texts in the mainstream or in the literature syllabus yet. But then we expose the students to our research to help them have a scheme running through and let them trace how radical and how it is for them, the current generation, to look out for ways to combat and resist the various influences that patriarchy, class, and caste still imposes upon women in a very, very subtle manner. They may not be very, it may not be very openly done today, but then there are still forms that they have to resist. So we take them through texts like some of the poems of like Hunger, where in the anthology by Arjun Dangle, I think, Poison Bread. So those are again images which are startling, but they're not so shocking as Meena Kandaswamy. So when we talk about how poetry is no longer that rosy kind of experience that they have read and grew up with, but it's an experience of realism, life as they see in reality, where he talks, where Dalit poet talks and records and experiences of all the terrible atrocities that they've gone through. So we let them read stories like Draupadi's Dokti by Masheta Devi. Then, so when we go and attend some of these conferences, we again come back and share and tell them. So sometimes we encourage them to attend conferences, present papers, we help them get as much exposure to the contemporary writers and ways of resisting different kinds of ideological influences and hegemonical dominations. I hope I have answered. Any more questions? Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Kairunisa. I teach here in the Department of English. My question is to Professor Chanda. I thank actually both the panelists for your insights, and I really look forward to reading Legonita Devsen's work. Of the entire variety of quote-unquote unruly women that the patriarchy love to hate, I think the women who are aware of their sexual needs and sexuality, I think are the people who are hated most. And in your presentation, you had made a reference to Surpanaka and how in Debolita Sen's rewriting or overwriting, she is not shamed, you had mentioned. And I'm curious to know how she had achieved that to restore dignity into this character. Would you please give some instances of that? And I really like the title of that she had mentioned, beginning with Sita. The Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie, whose very well-received TED talk called Danger of Single Stories. In which he says that if you tell the story of Africa and if you don't begin with the arrival of British, you have an entirely different story. So here also I think that I really look forward to read reading it. Thank you for introducing it to us.
There actually isn't very much to say. You need to read the story. But it is, I'll use another example which I remember very clearly because you asked for a particular instance from, Sita's journey into the netherworld. And it's just this incident at the end. We are aware, we say that, Sita she gets fed up of the way in which she's tested again and again and again. And she asks Earth to, part so that she can enter. That is what we know. In this story, while Sita is accusing Rama of abandoning her, Rama apparently, he winks at someone who's standing behind him, and this someone presses a button, and while Sita is complaining, the earth parts and she enters. So, I mean, it's just, basically what, I don't know, like this whole cunningness of the thing, that I want to maintain my, whatever, my Purushottam status, that I can do no wrong. So I have everything set up as in the way in which I want, and you don't know anything about it. You're being honest in a relationship. You are trying to give your version of things that, you are wrong, you did this and this. I'm not interested in all of this. I want the world to know that, you out of your own willingness to enter into the earth, you entered, and I have, what can I do? I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for your suffering. I'm not responsible for the way in which you have been abandoned. I'm simply not taking responsibility. That's all. Which makes me divine and makes you human. That, it's like, it's divine ordination that you will look at. A similar thing happens with Shurpanakha also. Like when her nose is cut off and all, basically she's just erased from the whole matter. These two brothers, they just kind of wipe their hands and leave. So, she doesn't get anything to say. That's the whole point.
Thank you.
But you need to read it.
I will.
Any more questions?
So, I want to thank both the speakers for the two very, very engaging presentations which set us thinking. I think it's late in the day, but I think it's never too late, to get new thoughts and new directions. Thank you, and thanks everyone for being patient and active participants. Over to you.
It was very interesting and a thought-provoking session. I express my sincere gratitude to the speakers and the chair, Professor Nikhila ma'am, Professor Ipshita ma'am, and Dr. Melissa ma'am. We are really honored to have you here. Thank you. Now we have the recorded video of the keynote address by Professor Nandini Sahu, Vice Chancellor, Hindi University, West Bengal. I request the technical team to play the recording. Thank you.
Namaskar. I extend my gratitude to Sahitya Academy, Delhi, and MANUU, Hyderabad, for having invited me to deliver the keynote address in the International Conference on Women's Writing in India, the New Perspectives. These kind of conferences are very, very important because through these conferences, the scholars, the participants, writers, media, and the common people who are a part of the discourse, all of them unite and create a new platform, a new interdisciplinary platform and discourse that can be helpful in creating a more inclusive society, a more flexible society for women. 2 days ago, in the International Women's Day celebration in Delhi on the 8th of March, I was a part of the Women Vice Chancellors Conference. Some discussion came up that only 11% of Indian universities have women vice chancellors. But at the same time, it was a very pleasant surprise for each one of us, all the vice chancellors participating there, that we were told universities having women vice chancellors are doing wonderful work and their growth rate is much ahead of any other university all over the world. It definitely was a matter of pride and encouragement for all the women vice chancellors there. Women live in solidarity, in sisterhood, they support each other, they create a more inclusive and a positive society for each other. Coming to myself as a woman writer, having written 10 poetry collections in English and overall 23 books on various subjects, including my fiction, my books on folklore and culture studies, on Indian writing in English, on English language teaching. I have experienced that I have grown as a writer and as a human being over the years. When I started writing, when I was hardly 7 years old, my first poem was about the farmers. When on a rainy day we were enjoying ourselves, the farmers were working. That is when I wrote a poem about the farmers, that because of them we have food on our plates. And even after that, my first poetry collection that came in the year 2003 or 4, when I was in Orissa at that time, that collection, The Other Voice, was full of poems about humanity, about green cultural studies, about ocean humanities, about things that we have been talking today, Anthropocene, inclusivity, how all the genders and all the creations on the planet Earth are equally important. As a folklorist, having designed the country's first MA program in folklore and culture studies with 20,000 pages of study material, I have experienced that women are the preservers of livestock and food, and women are the best archivers. They have documented dying and endangered cultures in a much better way than any other species probably. And my experience as a folklorist has taken me to places. I have visited many countries and many states, dying language groups, tribal communities, where I have come across people who were more than willing to discuss about their issues, their debates and their dying languages, and I documented their dying languages, made those a part of my syllabus and my courses that I launched and offered over a period of time. Now, coming to Hindi University as the Vice Chancellor, I have noticed that our students, especially our women faculty members and girl students, they are struggling every single day to reach the campus by traveling for 2 hours, 3 hours. But again, at the end of the day, they go home very fulfilled, very satisfied. After their classes, they go and take private classes with people in many places, and even they try to contribute to the university in a much better way by their extracurricular and their cultural activities. And yes, we have introduced many cells and divisions like equal opportunity cell, grievance redressal cell, and then we have also training and placement cell, through which we are trying to create a platform for students where they can be trained with soft skills and artificial intelligence and those kind of things, so that tomorrow they will be a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat. They can be job creators and they can be independent. This conference that MANUU is holding on women's writing in India, I have taken a topic, women's writing in India, the new perspectives, new archives and new epistemologies. And then a few questions I ask myself today as a woman writer and as a woman vice chancellor. I ask a question to myself that who do we live for? Do we live for ourselves or for a bigger society? And when a woman writes poetry or fiction or anything for that matter, she asks a question, who speaks for Indian womanhood? After independence, writers like Dutt, Sarojini Naidu and many other women writers in Indian Bhasha literatures, the rich regional literatures which we call Bhasha literatures, when they were writing, their issues were very, very important. Look at Sarojini Naidu, the freedom fighter. Her poetry was so inspirational. Or even look at Ashapurna Devi in her trilogy, the novels, Subarnalata, Bakul Katha, and those 3 novels. She talks about the independence of women and the education of women. But having said that, I would also like to put it on record here that there are writers among men. Look at Rabindranath Tagore or Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay or Premchand or Fakir Mohan Senapati. There are many male writers who have written about women's issues in a very intense and a meaningful way. So to me, my gender studies classrooms will be incomplete unless we talk about feminism, masculinity studies and queer studies. The 3 genders should be taken together. The issues of the 3 genders should be discussed as complementary to each other. And then Indian writing in English, especially vis-a-vis the writings of women, let's talk about language power and the feminist negotiation. Women use the language of power because they have been struggling with the power discourses. You look at our families, our households, when a male child is born, the celebration, and when a girl child is born, the celebrations used to be different. But now things have changed, the society is changing, and we are coming out of the global, we're coming out of the international issue of the girl child, and we're getting into a new literary currency in the globe. Indian women writers are heard very carefully. People are listening to their issues and their discourses very, very carefully. And then, Indian women, they're writing about agrarian economy, they're writing about economic independence, about colonial modernity, and about the gendered survival. The film that we are producing today, the movies which talk about women's issues, they take very, very complex issues of women. And literature and cinema, they are complementary to each other. As a folklorist, when I go to many countries and I talk to the women folklorists, I am very happy to know that the kind of material they are collecting and the kind of discourses that they are generating are so powerful. And in the world folklore scenario, women have been silenced, women's voices have not been heard, even if they are the better collectors of our dying and endangered cultures and our languages. But now the things have been changing. Indian universities are taking up courses and Indian research scholars are doing research on women writers by taking the very complex issues. Whenever I see those students who are doing their PhDs or their MPhil dissertations or PhD thesis on my poetry, they take very, very complex issues from my writings, issues that I might not have even thought about. And then they are taking those issues and they are doing their PhDs on those. And I think that we are going through a very beautiful period. Students, women students, girl students, they are coming up and they are discussing the new perspectives. The body politics, caste, economy, and we are creating counter narratives vis-a-vis all of those. If you look at the Western theorists, like Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, who thinks about the subaltern speaking, or Helen Sisu, who talks about how women should speak through their body, and She creates the idea of a creature feminine. Indian women writers have started understanding those very clearly and presenting those in their narratives. Me, for myself, if you ask me to speak, my poetry collection, Sita, which has created ripples. It was published in 2014 for the first time, and this year it's coming out as a revised poetry collection, Sita, a long narrative poem, where I am talking about a character from the Ramayana, Sita, who is independent, free-thinking, progressive, and she's a decision maker. She's not a brooding, crying, complaining woman. So Indian women are no more brooding, crying, or complaining. They are taking life in their strides. They are creating a more powerful discourse for themselves through their writings. They are using language as politics towards a literature of and by women. I remember one of the conferences where I was sharing the dais with poet Jayant Mahapatra. The organizers introduced him as Meet Poet Jayant Mahapatra. And then they introduced me by saying, meet Indian woman writer writing in English, Nandini Sahu. I was amused and I told the organizers that I'm very happy that you are using all these adjectives for me, but please have the decency of calling the gentleman sitting beside me as Indian male writer writing in English. So everyone was amused and they started laughing. But yes, jokes apart, look at the serious concerns here. When men are writing, they are writers. When women are writing, they are Indian women writers writing in English. It's high time that we drop those kind of adjectives and we are just writers. And writers should be thinking about social change, about a positive society, upcoming very positive and optimistic society. Women are writing witness literature. Like in the court of law, the witness plays an important role. Similarly, women writers are playing the role of a witness in the court of life to create a more inclusive and a positive society. They're moving from representation to reclamation. Indian women writers used to be representatives of a group of marginalized people who were the subaltern. They were questioning, can the subaltern speak? But today, they are moving from subalternity to reclaiming a position for themselves. Indian women writers' writing is becoming powerful. It's moving from strength to strength every single day. Interesting and important issues are coming up. Women are getting into all walks of life. They are getting into very important and powerful positions where they are policy makers, policy planners, they are decision makers of the society and the world. And I think the world is moving forward to a much better society, good governance, and a very, very positive society. But yes, we have to also consider about those societies in the country and even in the world where women are still marginalized in our villages or in our small towns where women do not have a voice to speak. Probably international conferences like this that MANUU and Sahitya Academy are organizing, they should initiate their research scholars, their writers, and the students and the faculty members to go to those marginalized societies and become their voice. Only then this kind of a conference will be useful. Otherwise, after the conference, people just forget whatever they had discussed. A conference should have some positive outcome, some tangible outcome. With this, I will stop here by maybe reading a couple of lines from my recent poetry collection, Medusa, where again I am taking Medusa myth, the Western myth, and making her a part of our Indian pedagogy. And one poem there, Sisterhood, where I am inviting the three genders to join me in solidarity and sisterhood. I will just read a couple of lines from that before I stop here. The title, Sisterhood from Medusa. I am quoting Tanja Thalles. Women instinctually know how to nourish each other, and just being with each other is restorative. This is how I start by quoting her. Then the poem is like this. Thus, I talk a lot about solidarity and sisterhood. My sisters and archetypal sisters may please hear me out. I have been accessible yet peripheral, non-judgmental, non-indulgent, beyond all glamour, glory, and social scanners, getting into reckless and pointless things yet. I fancy my sisters to appreciate in spirit that I live alone in the company of others living alone, each one fortified by a lone ache of the heart. The fact that I was born in July, the volatile time of the year, that did not categorize any much of my temperament. Now there are mornings when I wake up, but I don't like to get up. Lying on the bed, I regret my squandered years that I have been that type who fits in everywhere. Ah, why have I been just so perfect? Full of campaign and strategism, I still believe that it's possible to change the world, this planet. My sculpted sisters often look at me and sigh, quote unquote, I want to be a woman like you, bold and independent. Dear sisters, I am that imperfectly perfect woman. Take me as I am, maybe with a pinch of salt. I wish you saw some tiresome apprehensions in there, some enduring experiences at most. So this is how the poem goes on. How sometimes women look at the so-called powerful women and then they think perhaps they have a better life. It's not like that. The life that you are leading is the best for you. You have to find purpose with that. Today, I have found the purpose of my life. After teaching in Indian universities for 25 years, after writing so many books on folklore and culture studies, Indian writing in English, and then English language teaching and poetry collections and story collections, I think I'm maturing every single day as a writer, because from my micro world of why me syndrome, I'm moving towards a macro world where not me but you are the concern. I think about myself, but actually I'm thinking about you, because as a woman, to me, the personal is political. My personal opinions, my decisions, my whims and fancies, and even the good or the bad work or good or the poor work that I may do definitely affects the society. So the personal is political. This is the idea. With this idea, I will stop here and I will request the participants, the scholars and the teachers, the paper presenters and everyone in this international conference to think about the purpose of their lives through literature. Today, I don't want to be the loudest voice in the boardroom when I am there as a part of the policy planners. Rather, I want to create a boardroom where everyone has an opportunity to speak. Giving a voice to everybody empowers me. Thank you so much for having invited me. Namaskar.
Very good evening, one and all. Honorable Registrar, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, our beloved HOD, Professor Naghendra Kottachuru, distinguished guests, respected professors, scholars, and dear participants. As we arrive at the concluding segment of this enriching academic gathering, we reflect on the insightful discussion and stimulating perspectives shared throughout the day. First of all, I welcome Honorable Registrar Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed to this session. Welcome, sir. And I'm heartily welcoming beloved HOD, Professor Naghendra Kottachuru, Head of the Department of English, and welcoming Dr. Geeta, Associate Professor and Convener of this Symposium, to this valedictory session. Welcome. The Symposium on Women Writing in India, Contemporary Perspectives and New Aesthetics has truly provided a meaningful platform for the dialogue and intellectual exchange. Now it's my privilege to invite Professor Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed to give guest of honor. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much once again. I don't know what to say in the concluding remarks because I want to hear from the organizers, the participants, the resource person, and our scholars how this symposium had been, one-day symposium had been. But in morning session after the inaugural session, of course, I attended the first session, and there we got the opportunity to listen to the experiences, the research area of 3 to 4 participants, scholars who had come from different universities. I understand that the participation in this symposium, one-day symposium, it's a very, fever session we had, but sessions were very specialized as I could perceive. And the scholars who had been invited had very deeper understanding of dealing with the or examining with the perspective that is involved in Indian women writings. No doubt they did touch some of the very important aesthetics that is involved in the women writings. And I do understand that by participation of our scholars, our faculty members, by sharing their view, engaging into discussion in the during the symposium or of the symposium, our understanding at looking at the core issues as far as dealing with the women issues, various aspects of women writings are involved, this must have been deepened. And we understand that this area of studies is very important through poetry, through autobiography, biography, story writings, folklore. There are various areas through which scholars are contributing, and undoubtedly the Indian writings dealing with women's have acquired a very important place in our literature. I am hopeful that we will be able to hear some good remarks from our scholars or from our participants, from our HOD and the convener of the symposium, Dr. Geeta. One thing is very important that the Sahitya Academy, I have seen that in this university or in our university or any other university, people apply to apply for, a sponsorship. They look for the sponsorship in various forms, be it seminar, conference, symposium, workshop, etc. and etc. And it is very difficult to get the sponsorship. It's very difficult to get the PDF because I, as registrar of the university, keep on signing and forwarding the applications, be it a scholarship, be it PDF, be it projects, or be it seminar or conference, but very few get. So that way we are lucky that Department of English is doing very well by inviting the attention of Sahitya Academy. Dr. Geeta has really worked a lot, and she had been successfully influenced the decision makers at Sahitya Academy. Otherwise, as far as I know the Sahitya Academy, there are very little scope for the English literature, if I am correct, because they are more interested into regional languages and the scheduled languages. So it's a good opportunity that Sahitya Academy, it's a national institution, it's an institution of importance, has supported our department, our university, as far as holding this symposia is concerned. And I do hope that this will open new windows, and our department and you all can have better collaboration with Sahitya Academy, with ICSSR, with ICHR, Indian Council for Cultural Relation, and other organization for making our academic exchange program, for making our academic discourse meaningful. So I'm thankful to our friend Professor Nagendra, HOD, our all faculty member who are present here since morning, our research scholars, participants. Some of them have gone to their hometown, otherwise Department of English gives very good representation. But this morning I came to know that a good number of the scholars coming from Kerala, they have left for their hometown for some reason. Despite we could see that a good number of participants were available here, and most important that Vice Chancellor Madam was not only she was available for inauguration, but she was here for about panel discussion also. She chaired a session and she was here till lunch. So we are getting good response from various quarters, from various stakeholders of the university, and I wish you all the best. And I do hope that very soon you will have another seminar, conference, workshop, etc. So thank you very much.
The session today have highlighted how contemporary women writers engage with question of gender, identity, caste, region, and social transformation, while also introducing innovative narrative strategies and aesthetic forms. We are privileged to listen to insightful deliberations by distinguished speakers and panelists whose contributions have deepened our understanding of the evolving landscape of women's literature in India. Now it's time to invite Professor Nagendra Kottacheru, HOD of Department of English, to deliver guest of honor. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mumtaz. So before I share a few words, let me thank our beloved registrar for giving us his valuable time. Thank you so very much, sir, because you were there and you are a part of like most of our academic activities, and you have been encouraging us to move ahead with too many academic activities. Thank you so very much, sir. So good evening to everyone. On behalf of the Department of English, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our distinguished keynote speaker and respected chairpersons, resource persons, and panelists for their valuable insights and contributions to this one-day National Symposium. I also thank all the participants, faculty members, research scholars, and students for their active participation and support. Last but not least, my special appreciation goes to the organizing team and volunteers for their hard work in making this program a grand success. Thank you all for your presence and cooperation, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Now, it's my privilege to invite Dr. Gita, Associate Professor and Convener of the Symposium, to give concluding remarks. Welcome, ma'am.
I won't take more than 3 minutes. Good evening, everyone. So, on the occasion of International Women's Day, we have organized one-day National Symposium on Women Writing in India, Contemporary Perspectives and New Aesthetics, in collaboration with Sahitya Academy, New Delhi. Respected dignitaries, esteemed guests, faculty members, my dear colleagues, and my dear students, and my scholars. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks on one-day symposium. First, I would like to thank on behalf of the Department of English, MANUU. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you, making the National Symposium successfully. And most importantly, I am especially grateful to the Sahitya Academy, Ministry of Culture, New Delhi, one of the India's premier literary institution, for their invaluable support and collaboration. Over the years, Sahitya Academy has been at the forefront of promoting literary excellence across languages and regions, fostering scholarship and celebrating the rich diversity of Indian literature. Their encouragement has enabled us to bring together scholars and women writers to explore contemporary perspectives and new aesthetics in women's writing. I extend my special thanks to all our women resource persons, panelists, who enriched this symposium with their invaluable insights, research, and experiences. Your contributions have illuminated the many dimensions of women writings in India and have sparked meaningful discussions that will continue to resonate beyond today's deliberations. We are deeply honored by the presence of our Honorable Vice Chancellor Padma Shri Syed Ainul Hasan Sir, whose gracious support and encouragement continue to inspire academic initiatives at the university. My heartfelt thanks to our respected Registrar Sir, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, for gracing this occasion with his presence and for sparing his valuable time to be with us today. We are truly grateful for your constant motivation and for inspiring us to strive for excellence. Thank you, sir, for your kind support and encouragement. We are deeply honored by the presence of our Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu. I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to her because it was in the morning she wanted to deliver her online talk. So due to some prior commitment, she has recorded her video and she has shared with us. I would like to thank Dr. Gogu Shamala, ma'am, for graciously accepting our invitation on such a very short notice and for sharing her insightful reflection that added immense depth to today's deliberations. I also extend my sincere thanks to Mrs. Arshia Hassan, President MAK, our guest of honor, for her presence and encouragement on the occasion. As Sir has said, she has attended inaugural as well as our panel discussion also. My sincere appreciation goes to the IMC for covering inaugural session, and my special thanks to CDOE for covering the entire program and ensuring that the important discussions. Yes, sir, I see they covered inaugural, but CDOE has covered the entire event. So my special thanks to them. Yes. Yeah. So I also extend my gratitude to CPDMT and CSIT for their valuable technical support in facilitating the smooth conduct of this program. I would also like thank the organizing committee, volunteers, scholars, and students who dedicated efforts ensured the smooth and successful conduct of the symposium. Finally, I extend my heartfelt thanks to the participant and the students whose enthusiasm and engagement made today's event truly meaningful. We hope the discussion and the ideas shared today will continue to inspire further research, dialogue, and creative engagement with contemporary women's writing. Thank you all once again. Have a good evening.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your thoughtful concluding remarks, for beautifully summing up the essence of today's symposium. With the national anthem, we are going to summing up the academic gathering. I'm kindly requesting the technical session to play national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे